Greetings to you all. I'm here with my new friend, Dr. Jessie King. We're in Prince George, and we're just about to go for a walk here. So, welcome to meskanâs, kâpimâcimohk. Jessie, can you tell the viewers where we are right now?
Yeah.
Put this GoPro on.
So this is the confluence, and this is Lheidli T'enneh territory, and Lheidli T'enneh directly translates to the people of the confluence, the people where the two rivers meet. And in saying that, I probably should indicate that I've only been connected to this territory for 20 years now. My territories are on the coast, about 800 kilometers to the west. We're Tsimshian, specifically from Gitxaała, or Gitxaała, which is people of the saltwater, people of the open sea on Dolphin Island, just off the coast of Prince Rupert.
Wow.
And when I first came here, I met an elder, and she's gone now. But one thing that she told me when I got here was the first chance you get was go and introduce yourself to the water. And I came down here and I was picking rose hips with her, and we did just that. We offered some tobacco, we talked to the river. She told me to tell the river who I was, where I was from. So I told the river exactly that. I told it that I was Gitxaała, but I was also Irish and English on my father's side, that I had those identities. And yeah, ever since then I started coming here a lot, and then my children and I were here at least once or twice a week in the summer. I snowshoe down here, I feed the chickadees, look out for the bears.
So the chickadees know you're coming, I guess.
Yes, and I brought seed today for just that.
Hopefully we'll see them. So you're a professor at the University of Northern BC.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational journey? I know, for example, you studied in Sweden for a while.
Yeah.
So
I started in college back in Rupert, back when it was Northwest Community College, now Coast Mountain College, when our classes were in the basement of the museum.
Okay.
And in that time I ran into a professor that told me about a student exchange, a women in leadership exchange, and you could pick one of 4 countries to go to: Sweden, Finland, England, and I can't remember the 4th one now. But I remember at that time I was a big Canucks fan, like my dad was, and I was like, well, most of the Canucks are Swedish. I can't speak Swedish, so I'm gonna go to Sweden. And I landed in Västerås, which was about an hour and a half train ride outside of Stockholm, at this university called Mälardalens Högskola. And got there and realized all the courses I wanted to take were in Swedish except for psychology and philosophy. So I started taking psychology and philosophy courses for the year, and realized it was time to get closer to home because a lot of my grandparents' generation were getting older. I didn't want to be that far away from home. So I applied to UNBC in 2005, early 2005, and started that same year in September, and planned on being here for a year and a half to finish my psychology degree, and just kind of never left because at the time UNBC was full of amazing non-Indigenous mentors and folks that recognized that Indigenous students were coming up and were feeling uncomfortable, but they could support. One of them being Dr. Antonia Mills, who would literally sit me in her office when I was feeling hopeless and say, Jess, you remember, I'm just here holding space for someone like you. And I used to laugh and think, yeah, okay, like I know you're just saying that because of who you are and that you want me to feel supported. But come 2020, Antonia had just retired, Dr. Mills had just retired, and I now have her office at UNBC as a faculty member. So I reflect on that story a lot because I came to UNBC at a very lucky time. There were Antonia, there was Ross Hoffman, There was another person named Cindy Hardy who was in psychology, Henry Harder, and they all saw that I was struggling. But at the same time, they were telling me about new grad programs, convincing me that I had something to say and that I could make a difference, that I could actually teach. And up until that point in my life, I'd only come across people that would say things like, well, don't worry about university, Jess. It's not in your cards, in your small town. Like, this is it. So it was a shock to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I ended up taking a tenure position, and now actually it's a transition period again. This week specifically, as I'm moving down to CNC to take on an executive role as a VP Indigenization. Wow. So still in a way teaching, but now with an opportunity to make even more change, formulating and really giving a strong foundation to that pipeline for Indigenous students to come out of high school and see college as a normal step, then eventually see university as a natural step.
Okay.
And then more faculty. So it's funny that we're here by a river and knowing your love for rivers, because I've always been someone who made an extra effort to see where I'm needed, to move further upriver, to catch people sooner. And I think that's probably why I like this space so much, because it's been reflected in my career, being at Northern Health at first and thinking, you know what, I think I can move into the university before doctors get into practice and are struggling with how to help our people. So that's what I did. I moved into the university, and now I'm moving into the college and potentially impacting high schoolers' lives. So it's always been a chase upriver.
That's seems a pretty poignant kind of vision, that uprivering. I like that.
Yeah.
So just so the listeners know, CNC is the College of New Caledonia.
It is.
Which is also in Prince George.
Yeah.
And I understand that UNBC and CNC work together quite a bit and
they
try
do
to support each other.
They do. They have a really strong partnership. And the fact that the new president for the last 9 months has known the president at UNBC for a few years now, with me incoming, someone who's been with UNBC for almost 20 years, that relationship's only going to get stronger now. Yeah.
So you got your doctorate at UNBC?
I did. I did.
And what was that in? What did you study?
Yeah, so I was one of those that came through soon after it wasn't taboo anymore to do all of your degrees at one university.
Oh, yeah.
So I went through the Master's in First Nation Studies, and about 2 weeks after I defended, and I was about to enter the workforce as a researcher at the Friendship Center, Antonia Mills came to me and said, I just came out of a meeting where we approved a new health sciences PhD. And applications are opening in a few weeks. So I applied and I got in. I had 4 months off and went straight into the health sciences PhD in the first cohort in 2011. And I did that because my undergrad was in science, my master's was in arts, and for me it only made sense to circle back and go back to the sciences, where I felt so unwelcome at the time because we never talked about anything Indigenous back when I was doing my undergrad. So I thought, this is my chance to go back and start having those conversations in a really good way. And the funny thing was, here I was, just this young Indigenous woman in a cohort of all health authority executive level folks. And it was really fascinating to see the conversations and how they were shifting even in my cohort's work, but how they were also impacting me in those conversations. And it kind of inspired me to move into the health authority to work for the Indigenous health team as well.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I've been very lucky. It's been almost a happy accident academic and career journey. A lot of happy accidents, I like to call it.
Yeah. Well, I hear you use that phrase, and I mean, I think in my life and my career, I've had very similar, what seemed to be happy accidents, and I've also had people like the one you mentioned, Antonia, who basically say, here's the thing, there's work to be done, and there's this opportunity for you. Maybe you should think about doing that.
Yeah.
And I always say those people seem to see it all before I did, kind of thing. So
they usually do. They see and they know. And I find, and I mean, if I can even be a little bit bold, I feel like colonialism and history has taught us to sometimes not expect much of ourselves. But these good allies that come along who genuinely understand, hey, I'm a placeholder. Sometimes we need that opening, sort of that open door, to give ourselves permission to say, you know what, I am smart, I am grounded, and I have something to say. And it was always non-Indigenous folks that gave me that permission. I found I really struggled to give myself that permission, but also because I operate with a certain level of privilege as well, being that I possess identities that aren't Indigenous as well. And I mean, I have many family members that could have been in college, in university, but I wonder, why was I given that opportunity and not them? Right? So you always have those wonderings. Right.
How things played out. So at UNBC, in your role as a faculty member, what kind of courses have you been teaching?
So I jump around quite a bit. Lately I've been focusing more on health and women's studies. I focus in the health realm so that I can do that original let's go upriver goal, which is let's grab doctors before they're struggling in practice or before I'm standing in a room facilitating a cultural safety session and a doctor stands up and says, I treat all my patients the same, I'm colorblind.
Right, yeah.
No, I'm gonna catch them a little bit earlier. So I teach a course called Health and Healing. I teach health philosophy. I'm teaching a course this semester called Indigenous Women's Perspectives, where I try to not force, but welcome students into this space of discomfort where they can interrogate who they are in a safe space, their role in colonialism, how they've benefited, but also how they can make spaces for stories of joy. So we have really honest conversations about, what do you know of Indigenous peoples? And I asked this on my first day of health science, or the health and healing class. And I say, without thinking or judging one another, put up your hands and tell me, what's the first thing you think about when I ask you about Indigenous people's health? And immediately a few sheepish hands will come up, and it's always the statistics.
Right.
It's always the higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of alcoholism, substance use and misuse. It's never, you know what, in January 2023, Indigenous language learning was up. Or what First Nation has a health center in their community now for integrated services.
I see.
It's never those stories. So I kind of jump in between those now. Mostly the Indigenous women's courses right now are my priority.
How would you say your understanding of healing has come to be the way it is? Like, what have you learned? What have been your experiences that have caused you to center on healing in the ways you do?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has come from what I saw in the health authority, but also relating it to what I knew of my own family's experiences with the healthcare system.
Oh, yeah.
But I also tend to operate in this two-world space, this two-perspective space. And a few years ago, I just became hyper-aware of the propensity, this hunger for Indigenous people's trauma and pain in research and stories in the media. And it really drew me to this place of healing. So we already know the information. We know the statistics. What are people doing in terms of healing, and why is that important for people in universities to understand? Why is it important for those students, those same students, to understand their role in not only helping or supporting or walking a few steps behind someone on their healing journey, but their own healing journey as well. Because we always fall back to reconciliation. We have to reconcile with Indigenous peoples. But no, what actually has to happen is everyone has to reconcile. We all have to reconcile from how that history was hidden from all of us equally, some of us to an even greater extent, because of this fear of not being a human rights champion like Canada likes to tout itself as, or this fear of not knowing. And that comes from probably my background in human behavior and psychology, is understanding why do we say the things we say, why do we believe the things that we believe, why do we come up across barriers when a difficult conversation comes up, right?
Right.
And I was also at a point in my life where things were shifting, and I realized that I myself was unwell. I had been operating almost in autopilot, going through the university and meeting milestones that this colonial system told me that I had to achieve so I could walk across the stage and get a piece of paper. And in doing that, I actually forgot who I was and didn't actually know my own language, or I hadn't paddled on water for almost 15 years. And our people are water people. I used to be a kayak guide, and I realized I can't even remember the last time I touched a paddle. So I think that's where my hyper focus on healing came from, and just bringing more people into that conversation so that talking about someone else's experience or having questions about someone else's experience weren't seen as a bad thing.
Right.
Not knowing is not a bad thing. Not knowing is simply ignorance. And ignorance is only a bad thing if it's willful, if you choose it.
Yeah, what you said about, some people call that damage-centered research, right? Really resonated with me, and
that hunger, the hunger for pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one
What's wrong?
The one that I've reflected on a lot is the blanket exercise, which I don't know, for a while there was very popular, and I've never actually seen one done because Bob Cardinal, the beautiful ceremonial leader that I work with, he didn't support it. And the reason, he said, is that it's not about healing. It makes people off balance. So I've always often reflected on that, and so I mean we'd have a lot to talk about healing, you and I sharing, because certainly in my own work, as you said, it was the same for me, where I didn't realize how off balance I was. And so I'm just so grateful for all that's been shared with me about how I can actually care for myself. And I understand healing is very much connected to wisdom practices, and they're different, right? There's different ways that people can look after themselves, and so that's one thing in this research that we're doing that I really want to try to support, is local wisdom practices on how to make people well. Yeah. So Jessie, you've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but now's the moment when I want to ask you about your relationship to colonialism and how you've sort of struggled with that difficulty, and how you understand colonialism in your life, I guess.
Yeah. And this is a question that comes up quite frequently. It's the one that shows up at 3 a.m, right? And my relationship to colonialism goes, I think, far deeper than I've even had the chance to really understand, because I've operated in the space of being in two worlds without really having it explicit to myself, until I started seeing how much of myself I had lost along the way. And I only came to that realization when I went home every now and then, and I would see how much further and further I was away from my own community members, or what they were working on, or seeing the thing that really opened my eyes was seeing our youth, our kids, on Instagram. And I was learning language from them during the pandemic. And I remember this one Saturday morning, I was knitting, drinking my tea, sitting in my language class, and one of the other members mentioned a new Instagram post. So I immediately went to the Instagram page, and just like time stopped because I realized that there was a 6-year-old on the other side of the screen that was telling me how to say what moon it was in our language, or how to say salmon berries, or how to say hello, or this is my name. And I had that moment of, you know what, I've operated from a level of privilege, but at the same time, I've not operated from a level of privilege because I've chosen to live so far away from home. But how amazing is it that in this time of isolation, when people are struggling mentally, that I'm now getting healing from a 6-year-old teaching me my language on Instagram of all things. So my relationship with colonialism has been one that I've definitely benefited from. And I say that with a grain of salt because I often have people come up to me and say, wow, you must have gone through so much struggle in university, college, academia. And I actually haven't gone through nearly as much as most people would because of how I look or because of how I speak. And it made me really reflect on the things that I got from my dad, which I love my dad. He's been gone for 5 years now. But he gave me this perspective on life where people would come up to me and share like really racist things every now and then because I didn't look Indigenous to them. He gave me that gift that people would actually show me themselves. But at the same time, I had what my mother and my grandmother gave me in being deeply hurt by that. So my relationship with colonialism is really, it's almost like an ether space. I can't quite put my finger on it yet. It's something that I interrogate every day. But I find it's almost building in me sort of this unapologetic anti sort of spirit. Where if I see it in the university, I'll call it out gently at first. And if it's not responded to, then I'm a little bit more aggressive with it to say, hey, we need to pause and we need to talk about why we're having this conversation right now. Or we need to actually identify why there's a student in a 3rd-year course that's struggling with content that should be the norm. But colonialism is a fascinating thing because so many folks thinks it's something lost to history, that it's something that happened 200, 300, 400 years ago. It's long gone, get over it. We still live with that narrative. But the systems and the structures, especially in academia that we operate in, were not built for Indigenous people. They were built with the elite, non-Indigenous in society in mind. And it's been fascinating, but it's also really awakening at the same time, especially when I look to see the kind of person my dad was, who was pretty much, we like to joke that he was more Indigenous than I was because he would know our family members and our cousins by sight. And I wasn't the one that would have that information. But at the same time, his history is directly tied to that colonial relationship. Like, he had an aunt that worked as a nun. She worked in a church in Fort St. James. And we don't know a lot about her, but we know that she loved that area. And I've always wondered, like, where did that role start? Did she have a role to play in sort of that whole experience, right? But then what I saw in my dad was the same thing that I saw in those mentors at UNBC, which was, you know what, I see you. I see you, I want to listen to you. I want to learn more about you. And I started realizing that at UNBC, there were more and more students that were showing up with that same spirit. And it wasn't something that I had started seeing until about 2010.
Okay.
And which kind of goes back to your healing question. That's what healed me. was being in that teaching space and seeing that narrative shift where people were wanting to learn, and then sometimes people not knowing where to start at the same time, being scared, right? Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but it's ongoing, right? I'm always interrogating that colonial space. And like, you have to as someone who identifies a part of themselves as Indigenous, and you exist within a university or a college system. You have to interrogate it all the time.
Yeah, I'm just loving these.
I know, the big cottonwoods.
Trees here.
And the smell too, in the fall it smells spicy.
Right. I know cottonwoods, they need flooding, right, in order to stay healthy. Yeah. I'm guessing that hasn't happened here for...
Not for a few years now, no. Yeah. But the reason that part of the path flooded away, or fell apart, was because it flooded away.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple bridges in here they haven't fixed yet. But yeah, just around the corner there, me and my family bumped into a bear last year, and I was telling some folks at CNC today, we're so comfortable with bears on the coast. It's wolves that made us nervous.
Oh, yeah.
Bears in the fall, they just want to get fat.
Right.
They just want to find the berries and to know where you are.
I noticed on campus today when I was there was a sign, caution, moose are in the area.
Moose in the area.
I've never seen a sign like that on a university campus before.
That was a first for me too, and you wouldn't believe still to this day how many students come to UNBC and you have to tell them, please don't walk up to the moose.
Yeah, geez, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite funny.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how you responded to my last question about your relationship to colonialism, and there's so much that you said that really resonated with me. I was thinking about some of the writing. There's actually quite a few writers in South America. Of course, they write in Spanish, most of them, that have kind of troubled on some of these things. And one of them is this concept they call a coloniality of being, which, you know, you mentioned colonialism as something a lot of people think is a historic period that, 200, 300 years ago, but it's not relevant to us anymore today. And those folks down there, they talk about how colonialism inhabits you as a human being. And so it lives on in the human practices. And there's one quote I was thinking of where basically they said it's in schooling practices, it's in assessment practices, it's in the textbook, colonial culture, which is such a hard thing to read about, how immersed we are in it. And the other thing that really resonated with me with what you said was this difficulty with it, that we're always kind of struggling with it and confronted with it in different ways. And I think with our students, the students I work with, that's actually a really important message for them. That here I am, this person who's thought about this for a long time, and I still don't have it figured out. I still struggle with it in my own way. And I'm sure a lot of your students respond the same way to things that you say. It's kind of comforting in a sense to say, oh, this person is also struggling.
Yeah. And I mean, is it even really a struggle though, right? Like, are we supposed to know the answer? Like, something that really shifted my mindset when I feel I kind of found myself as an academic was this comfort with not knowing things. This comfort of not being the expert. And it actually hit me during, if I can circle back to your blanket exercise comments, during cultural safety sessions when I used to go out. And I had a really great conversation with my colleague who really believed that our sessions were to break people's hearts so we could mend them again.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we had a really cool conversation one day because I told her my perspective was, why break hearts when we can simply invite people to the table without causing more harm that colonialism already did for us, without making people feel that guilt and that anger and that shame, because they already do that on their own.
Right.
It already comes up when you feel that you don't know something. So we started changing how we were delivering our sessions, which was to move away from let's break hearts to how do we invite more people to the table? How do we give people permission to ask questions, to place themselves in this narrative that maybe they're just getting for the first time? And it came up for us one day. I decided to go off script in one of our sessions with an upper level executive group because we had a little bit of a forceful questioning period, which is, why do we have to learn this? Why am I having to take time out of my day to be here? And I stood up and I said, you know what, we're here because of people like me who didn't learn about residential schools or Indian hospitals or why it mattered to be who I was until I was about 24 years old. And we're here because you just stood up and asked and commented on how you were surprised that the school across from you when you were growing up was a residential school. We're here because of that hidden history. We're not here to make you feel bad. You already do enough of that on your own. Humans are guilty creatures. We will always find something to feel bad about. And this person who I knew for a while at that point started crying. And I realized, you know what, we can't be breaking hearts anymore. We can't be breaking hearts. And I actually had a really great relationship with that person after they spoke up. And I remember in the moment thinking, wow, I'm never gonna have a relationship with this person ever again because they're angry. But it wasn't anger that they were presenting with, it was fear. It was the fear of, oh my goodness, I'm this far along in my career and I have no idea how to have this conversation. For the first time, I don't feel like the expert. Yeah. But it all circles back on how that content is delivered, right? And yeah, this is where the trail
Things get a little perilous here, folks.
We're going off-roading.
I'll jump down here.
We'll send you back home really knowing the territory now. Forgot to mention this is the hazing part of the river ritual.
I love it.
But I mean, in those moments of reflection when you give people permission to feel what they need to feel, you really learn a lot about the things that we need to start talking about. And people learn so much about themselves in those moments.
So you're already leaning that way, Jessie, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what we call unlearning. And this summer has been really interesting for me because I had the chance to write a paper where for the first time I try to articulate what I think unlearning is. And it's really been useful for me. But I would say it's this something that we experience that's unique, that causes us to sort of, things begin to unravel about the surety we had about how the world works and how we understand it. And so what do you have to say about unlearning for yourself? Like what were maybe some of the things you'd like to share about those for you?
Ooh, this is a big one. So probably about 5 years ago, I was undergoing some pretty big changes. And personally, and my father was terminally ill. And I started to really sit with myself and think, well, what does it mean when I cross that stage with a PhD now? What does that mean to be someone who claims an Indigenous identity, but who has been trained in this colonial space. And I started reflecting on my experience as a student and realized that I hadn't undergone a process of unlearning and understanding my responsibility now to my ancestors, my responsibility to other Indigenous students who were either already in university or who were yet to come. And I remember this one moment, we were hosting a summer science camp for youth, Indigenous youth from across northern BC. And I originally wasn't part of the program, but one of the program coordinators called and asked if I would do a session with the students because they were nervous. And I remember thinking, wow, I really don't think I'm the person to do that. I don't think I have anything to offer. I'm just recovering from doing a PhD. I don't know if I can help these youth figure out who they are. And I remember walking behind these two young girls who were just terrified. They were worried about where we were going, what the plan was for that day.
Oh yeah.
And they asked me where I was from, and I told them I'm from Gitxaała. My father is from this background, and I went to school here. And by the end of that week with them, I was walking down Student Success Street with them. And I remember being just so amazed because they had gone from being so terrified to they were exchanging contact information. They were exchanging phone numbers, or I can't remember this, Snapchat.
Oh yeah.
They were exchanging that information and making a plan to come to UNBC in 5 years. Like, these are 13, 14-year-old girls who, at the beginning of the week, were terrified of being in that space, who are now making a plan that, you know what, we're going to come here in 5 to 6 years, and they were from different communities. And I couldn't believe that shift. And then I realized sort of what my responsibility was to the youth. Did you want some seeds? This is their busy time. Yeah, take some seeds and you just stand there and they'll come down.
What kind of birds are these?
The chickadees.
The chickadees?
Chickadees, yeah. Yeah, so then I really started thinking, you know what? I didn't just go to school for 18 years to get a good job or to feel good about being able to carry the credentials doctor. I went to university all this time because I now have a responsibility to help others. And I remembered, I started thinking about these teachings my grandmother had. Did you want to try feeding some chickadees? That my grandma would give me. Oh, that's so good. It's healing. You got to be patient for them though, but they come.
I just got into farming and gardening, so I really had to take care of my mental health through vegetables.
Oh.
This was beautiful to see.
Oh, and they're funny too, because one will come down and they'll leave and they'll come back with their friends.
Bring your buddies over. That's so awesome.
Yeah, so then I started thinking about the teachings my grandma would give me without actually telling me it was a teaching. We'd be out berry picking and she would make the trail a little bit wider without causing damage. And I started thinking about that, like, wow, why would I walk this one person trail when I have the opportunity to make it a little bit wider? And then when I get at the end, I won't be there alone anymore. I won't be the one that's sitting on all of the committees. I won't be the one that's sitting on all of the advisory boards. We'll have a whole crew of folks who have something to say, who can transform the university. And then maybe a few less Indigenous academics will get burnt out.
Right.
Like, it will just be the norm. It won't be showing up to a committee meeting and saying, shoot, we didn't phone anyone that's Indigenous. We didn't invite the Indigenous person, right? It's just the normal thing to do now. It's not an add-on. Look at you.
Are they coming over there? Maybe I'll...
They are so brave. Yeah, try getting in a little bit further.
I'll close
because
up
that one's
I'll
looking
close
at
up
you
shop.
right there.
I'll close up shop and you can...
Have you ever fed chickadees before?
Yeah. for us, they're Gitxaała go 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 go.
Yeah, their name or their sound, their song, hey?
Yeah, it's not chickadee. Gitxaała, they're called.
I had a grad student friend years ago, I can't remember her name anymore, but she did bird research.
Okay.
And some of it was on chickadees. And their songs are actually just barely different from one another, so they can identify each other in the wild.
Cool.
They had family songs. Yeah.
So these...
I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh no, it's a
was a
beautiful
big one.
story, Jessie. Yeah. So these young people that you heard from on that day, you said that was 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, I think it was in 2018, 2019.
So
It could have been 2017.
Have they made it to UNBC yet?
I keep looking for them. I haven't seen them yet. But I really believe deep down that they're somewhere in there. They're somewhere in there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and that, like you said, you didn't know your grandma was teaching you, right? But that inheritance, that responsibility, as you call it, it makes a lot of sense that you're moving over to the college now,
Yeah,
right?
moving upriver.
Yeah, to carry on with that work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Catch folks younger, because if you can walk with someone when they're at that really formulative part of their life, when they're just trying to figure out who they are, what is culture, what does that play in my life, if you can walk with people sooner, then they're only the stronger for it.
Right.
And I like to joke with people that the way I think about moving upriver is really self-serving in a funny way. It's self-serving because I don't want my children to have to do this work. Don't get me wrong, I love my work, I love teaching, but I don't want my children to be having these same conversations that I have to have over and over again. I want them to walk up to the college and the university and just swing those doors open like they belong there, right? Not like me, where I got up to those doors and I was like,
Yeah.
this is a heavy door, do I belong here? It's just the thing to do.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with you. I think we probably got enough.
Oh,
Here
well,
to-
Deutschen, thank you. Merci.